Now I invite Daniel Benamouzig, Director of Research at the CNRS, holder of the Health Chair at Sciences Po. So he will speak to us, he will present some research work on the lobbying strategies in France and the successes, but also the failures. And I think it's very important to know and to highlight that sometimes they lose, they don't win every time. So Daniel.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation and the privilege of being here to share all that information compared with different other speakers. I'm rather a newcomer in the field. Basically, I'm a sociologist and I work on health policy in general, not specifically on addiction or on alcohol consumption. And we did, before this work I will present today, we did some research on the organization of lobbying in another field, which is the agro-food industry. And I will compare the two sectors to a certain extent with quite similar ways of doing. And this was our point of departure. Just to begin, this is just not very strong example of this kind of direct influence that you can have between alcohol professionals on the one side and the top decision maker on the other side. But this is the typical kind of relation that can be observed. And this is not anecdotic, as in France, one of the structure of the lobbying activity is that it is targeting the very top of the state with a certain success. And it is particularly the case with the Élysée Palace and the role of the Président de la République in France. So just do not consider this not just as an anecdote to begin the presentation. As previously mentioned, what we did in this research is to see to what extent what we try to enlighten on the agri-food sector is similar or not in the alcohol industry. And so we did this comparison, asking whether there are some specificities of the alcohol industry lobbying. And in the case of France, by the way, we don't, except on the cover of the book, we don't call it lobbying, as it is connoted quite negatively as such, and we try to be as clinical as possible and considering more the corporate political activities as such. And we tried also, this is what was just said about that beyond the organization of these activities, what is their sense or the chance of success, what is their capacity, and what in parallel is the capacity of public bodies to resist the kind of, to resist sometimes the kind of influence they can implement. To do this research, which has been published in a report supported, and this is also for me the opportunity to thank very much Santé Publique France for funding this research we did with my colleague Joan Cortinas. We use basically the same mixed method, both qualitative and quantitative, that we used previously for the agri-food industry, extracting some data from social network. This is one characteristic of this industry. They are hidden to a certain extent, but they are very proud also of what they are doing, and they communicate a lot about what they are doing, who they are meeting at a certain moment. So you can register relatively systematically what they are doing. This is more the quantitative side of the research by focusing during a certain period of time a number of companies involved in these diverse practices. And we complemented that with qualitative interviews as well, plus some observations, and particularly as we are working on the French case in the French Parliament. So what I will try to do is to sum up, and many things have already been presented in previous presentation on a typology of the corporate political activities on the one side, then trying to see how it is organized in France, and in a context in which the legislation is, of course, the target, not only on labeling but on some other aspects of the public policy on alcohol and the legislation. The whole goal of this work is to relax the strength of the existing norms. Finally, I will try to compare two cases: one case of success for the industry and one case of success for public policy making, failure for the industry, and trying to extract some variables that could explain, to some extent, the success and failure in both cases. So, in the case of agri-food, in the agri-food sector, we identified plenty of strategies, and some of them were mentioned by Mr. Petitcroux in particular. But we try to classify them in three main families of strategies, not only because they correspond more or less to each other, but mainly because they are done and they are implemented by the same specific actors, which are relatively different when you consider the different families of activities. These types of activities are first what we call cognitive strategies, which mean strategy based on knowledge, widely speaking, not only scientific knowledge, but also some other kind of cognitive arguments and proposals. And we distinguished, quite classically speaking, the provision of knowledge, but in the meantime, as this knowledge is very often biased, some sort of ignorance, which is intrinsically embedded in this knowledge. And the manufacture of doubt, which is well known in the case of the tobacco industry, but which does exist also for the food industry, and something which is particularly relevant for the alcohol sector, a way of reframing quite systematically scientific evidence into something else, which is in general something about culture, about the role of what we call in France le terroir, which is the land itself and the cultural value of the land in the case of the wine industry in particular, but not only. The second family of strategy is more classically identified as lobbying, properly speaking, which is relational strategy which try to contact directly different types of decision makers, members of parliament, members of the executive branch at different levels, administrative people. I don't know if agencies are particularly targeted, and there are sometimes, but this is typically the kind of connection which is made. Apart from this very intensive work of contacting people, of being in touch, whether directly, informally, personally, or by writing letters or by writing documents personally to these people, there are two other political strategies coming with that. The first one is the fact of making alliances. We're trying to be together here and to see how connections can be made with the climate change, with the other industry. This is, of course, the case as well, and we'll try to exemplify that in the case of alcohol with different sectors. The alcohol industry don't play alone. And finally, also mention the substitution to policy makers by redefining by themselves on their own what is public policy making and by promoting their options in policy making. And finally, what we call the symbolic strategy, which is, simply speaking, a strategy which manipulates the image of the industry itself, trying to promote itself as an agent of prevention, sometimes even of public health on the one side, and trying to discredit more or less systematically any opponent or identified as opponent people, and particularly coming from the public health realm. But what is key, what was key in this research on the food industry is that the different strategies are operated by specific players, by specific kind of organizations. I'm coming from the field of sociology of organizations. We are very familiar on focusing on these organizations. And what we did observe is that the cognitive strategy is operated by dedicated organizations like research centers, university chairs, think tanks, which have the ability to manipulate knowledge, to be trained as such, and to have a capacity to be credible in providing certain knowledge. And there are many, and they provide a lot of elements. The relational strategies, some of them were mentioned previously, are more operated by communication strategies or by friend group, parliamentary clubs, I will come back to that, which play a key role. And as you see, only for French, you have a number of them. There are dozens operating, and totally speaking, there were more than 60 dedicated organizations working full-time on this work of political activities. And finally, we observe a third kind of organizations, which are more philanthropic organizations, philanthropic foundation, that do manipulate this image of some big companies, big firms, and that try to mimic philanthropic activities by promoting social work, by promoting the promotion of sport, and so on and so forth. Just to be short, they do work with specialized professionals, different kind of professional profiles, and they do not have the same capacity, the stronger being also the more active and with the more capacities. So, if now we come to the alcohol sector, what is the context and the target of all this work or similar work? What is noticeable in the case of France is that you have, like in some other countries, a decrease of consumption and now even of wine production, and you have a shift from something which is more an everyday consumption to something which is less regular, more occasional, and more focused on some groups of the population, and with differences by age. We mentioned the kids, for instance, but this is the case for different ages, differences by gender, and as such, a segmentation, of course, of the market as such. What is also quite important, and this is particularly the case for the wine industry, but not only, is this kind of terroir identity, terroir positioning of most of the brands, of most of the economic players in this in the field. In terms of regulatory target, this is not here labeling, which is the main target. Is more different existing regulation. There are different types of existing rules. Some of them being more long-term and relatively wide in terms of advertising, binding, in terms of pricing and taxes. But you have also some specific regulation on dedicated identified risks on road, at work, in sport context, for instance, or according to specific groups of the population, according to their age in particular, or in the case of pregnancy. Of course, what we will observe is a constant effort to weaken these different rules and different aspects of what is encompassed in the Loi Evin, we call it in France, Evin law, according to the name of a quite famous Ministry of Health who passed this legislation. So in the case of alcohol, and this is what we do describe in our report, we do observe more or less the same types of strategy with more or less the same types of organizations operating them. In the case of cognitive strategy, there are some science or semi-science or pseudo-science which is mobilized. This was the case, you probably have it in mind by heart, of the French paradox debate, which involved different scientists, French scientists, and most of them coming from the region de Bordeaux. Some other debates about the characteristics of polyphenol as opposed to ethanol, and this kind of debates. But in general, what is more frequent is a kind of opposing existing scientific literature by explaining that we should be more doubtful because it's more complex, because the the connection is not exactly a causal relationship, but more a correlation, and so we cannot be sure that it works for human beings, and so on and so forth. And the massive work which is done in this field is to reframe the subjects, to reframe the subject from a scientific issue into something which is more cultural, which is more about the terroir, about the heritage of the wine. And when you do so, you simply shut up the mouth of scientists who are just not legitimate to deal about what is at stake at that moment. We observe that more or less you have always the same players in this game. Some of them on the slide, and with a particular cluster in the Région de Bordeaux, which is of course a key producing area for wine. Second strategy we do observe is more this relational strategy, contact strategy, alliance making strategy, with sometimes different organizations and groups, particularly different group in the parliament, different in the National Assembly on the one side and in the Senate. In the other side, as previously mentioned, targeting the very top of the state, President Macron particularly, but not only. This is also the case for the Ministry of Finance and Economy, who is, of course, a key minister in the governmental architecture. Quite interestingly, you have many alliances with different sectors and sometimes quite different sectors. The sector of communication with very strong alliances because of the budget of advertising in particular, but also in the case of culture, you will find again the terroir problematic. Sports, as previously mentioned, and finally another strategy, typically the substitution of political action. And a good example, well known at Santé Publique France, is the Sober January. We tried to replace the project of implementing a dry January, and instead of a dry, they did prefer sober, with a certain level of consumption coming with that, of course. And many other examples of these different kind of political, relational activities, and we identified only for this kind of strategy more than 30 specific organizations full-time. Finally, the third kind of activity is what we call the symbolic activity, and they look very much like what we did observe for the food industry. By trying to have a better image for themselves, of course, as being part of local activities, of local policies, of cultural activities, but also by trying to discredit as systematically as possible those players, those playing in the field of public health, being characterized as prohibitionist, hygienist, and so on and so forth. So let us come and let us finish with the two cases. The first one is the success for the alcohol industry, as is an attempt to relax quite significantly the existing law Evin. It's a case of strength of this lobbying activity, and they did succeed in relax the ban on advertising. In the case of advertising, could mention the fact that it is not about wine or about cognac, it is about the terroir and specific terroir. In the case the terroir is mentioned, then the legislation should be different, and the legislation was modified as such. When we do observe the debates and the debates in the parliament in particular, what we do observe is the force and the strength of a coalition much wider than the alcohol, the usual alcohol suspects, integrating communication player, the media, being involved in this argument, and I would like to insist a lot on that. With a quite good argument, they manufactured a quite good convincing argument about that. This is the collective side of the coalition, that we should distinguish better what is advertising for wine and what is more information and cultural information for people as such, and to be differentiated, even if the messages are not that different. In front of them, they had an rather isolated opposition, mainly the public health usual players, with quite limited resources, as previously mentioned, with a quite unbalanced situation, and so they could win in this case. But in a more recent debate about the possibility, another attempt to relax the legislation in some context about sports, particularly. There, what we did observe is that the situation is very different, and it was not a success for the industry. In the context in which the coalition is weaker, this is not about the whole alcohol industry. These were the brewers who were on the forefront rather than the whole industry and the wine makers in particular. And so the elected politicians in their constituency were fewer, less powerful as such, and even the cognitive aspect, the argument, the argumentation was itself weakened. What they tried to convince, the way they tried to convince people is that there was a connection between being happy by doing sport and being happy by consuming alcohol in the same kind of festive activity. But this link was not that convincing as such, and did not work for many people, for many parliamentarians in particular. In front of them, they had a stronger opposition, even within the government, with the balance that was not clear, and so the Ministry of Health having the capacity of opposing itself, which was clearly not the case in the balance in the previous situation. When we compare, and I really finish with that, when we compare the two cases, what we see is that, of course, the strength and the importance of the alliance is key in this case, and it is not played only in the alcohol and not mainly with the alcohol industry players, but more with alliances outside the sector, outside the alcohol sector, with communication players in the one kind, and it was successful as such because they have their own capacity of lobbying, of mentioning the budgets which are at stake, and so on and so forth. While in the case of sport, the alliance was more local, less powerful, with less powerful and less experimented players. I will insist, apart from the other variables, to be shorter on the strength of narrative, and I think that this is a cognitive part on which scholars and experts in the field of public health could play a role, as cognitive aspects are so important as such. Just to insist on that, and maybe we'll come back to this point in the coming discussion. The key importance of knowing your enemy, as phrased previously, it's clearly very important, of having this political activity and capacity on the side of public health as well. But I would like to insist something that came not from the food industry, not from the alcohol industry or chemicals or tobacco, but which comes, and this is something we worked on previously, more on the pharmaceutical sector, in which you have in France an obligation of publishing any euro that you spend on promotional activity. We have a national database which is called Transparence Santé, France Health Transparency, and which mention any euro, and this is mandatory for the companies to declare their spending. We could imagine, and this is something we proposed for in the case of the food industry, I'm sure that it could have some value also on the alcohol industry, that given the fact that the impact on health is so strong, that there could have an obligation of transparency, and the legislation do exist as such. There is just a way of adapting it to new sectors which are directly on board when we are talking about health and public health in particular. So I stop. I'm sorry for being too long, but I did not.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel.